All right, so we're about to start the afternoon looking at fostering well-being, which I think is a topic which is close to everyone's heart, and hopefully we'll manage to get some thought-provoking discussion going for everyone. I'd like to introduce my panellists to discuss how to be well in an unwell system. So firstly, we've got Dr. Clare Skinner, who is an emergency physician and Director of Emergency Medicine at Hornsby Hospital. She's interested in improving hospital culture with a focus on civility and respect for colleagues and patients. She's a self-confessed idealist, a compulsive committee joiner, a writer, a piano player, and occasionally makes bad art too. She reports that she has never been able to touch her toes, and in that respect, I'm glad to be in such good company. Thank you, Claire. The next speaker on the panel will be Dr. Jules Willcocks, who is an emergency physician and the Director of Pre-Vocational Education at Barefoot Hospital. He has trained as an executive coach and was Deputy Chair of the Mentoring Group at the Australasian College of Emergency Medicine. Jules has an interest in the practical aspects of well-being and firmly believes that you can't perform to the best of your abilities unless you're well. So to be a really good doctor over a long career, Jules argues that it is as important to work on the skills that will allow you to be well as it is to work on acquiring medical knowledge and expertise. Our next speaker on the panel is Dr. Weston, who was named most likely to donate a kidney to a patient by her medical school cohort. She's a PTY 6 doctor in training with a passion for improving culture of our working environments. In 2017, Caitlin undertook a Churchill Fellowship exploring policies and programs for clinical health and wellbeing in the USA, Canada and the UK. Since then, she has interrupted her ANSCA training to implement her research findings, designing a wellbeing module for junior doctors on the mobile app Resident Guide. Caitlin serves on the board of Doctors Health Services as well as a number of committees with the AMA. And finally, I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Chris Elliot, who's a paediatrician who works part-time as a staff specialist at St George Hospital in private practice and as a stay-at-home father of 3. Chris is particularly interested in health communications and research, how stories, data and communities can help deliver excellent patient care. Thank you all. Okay. I might ask the person down the back also to start our timer so that I can make sure that I stay on track. Thank you. So the topic today is how to be well in an unwell system. And I just thought some few thoughts and reflections on well-being. It's a complex combination of a person's physical, mental, emotional and social health factors. It's linked to happiness and life satisfaction, and well-being is when your psychological, social and physical challenges are in balance with your psychological, social and physical resources. There was an Australian study that was published about a decade ago, and in it was looking into wellbeing and GMOs and found that 71% of doctors were concerned about their own health, 71% reported low job satisfaction, 69% reported burnout, and 54% reported compassion fatigue. They're pretty alarming statistics, and hopefully we can use that to kick off about what we can start to do to address some of these subjects. So the first question goes to everyone in the panel. It's 2019. Why are we still having discussions about an unwell system? And everyone here has worked in New South Wales Health, has worked in the public healthcare system. It is an unwell system. Why is that still the case in 2019?
Go on, Caitlin.
That's hard. Well, as the most junior member of the panel who has spent the least time working in the unwell system, the impression that I get is that the landscape in which we work has changed so rapidly and our culture hasn't been able to keep up with it. I know that I have several colleagues in the field of clinician wellbeing who have been working on this and advocating strongly for over 30 years and are still advocating on the same points because they've seen so little change. I think the beautiful thing now is that there is actually a recognition of the importance of clinician wellbeing for quality and safety in healthcare. So there is a groundswell and also increasing evidence and increasing leadership support for improvements. So I think even though it has taken a long time, and the rapid change, we're still definitely catching up to that curve. I think we are going to see a lot of change in our career.
And I think that's a good point about things being evidence-based, and once you've got some information to back you up, that's sometimes then when systems can actually make real change. Does anyone else care to talk to that point?
Yeah, I'll have a talk. I think that wellbeing for me is a lot about relationships and individual, the way that people work both individually with each other and in networks, and that there's an element of scalability that's happened in the health system. So the health system is now enormous. I think the health system used to be based on, you had a relationship with your general practitioner, that general practitioner knew a handful of specialists, systems were small and everyone knew each other. Ironically, I sat on the National JMO Executive Forum in 2002, which was probably before half the people in the audience were born, and we had this exact conversation then. And a colorectal surgeon described when he finished his consultant training that the whole department got together, took him out to dinner and bought him and his wife matching luggage to farewell them to the UK. And I can't remember any celebration of any of my milestones as a trainee because I moved around a lot. And I think, the modern system sees people as interchangeable parts. I think modern management tends to see the numbers and the system and want it as lean as possible and doesn't see that as actually complex human relationships at stake, and some of that's a little bit broken. I think that's got worse as the system's got bigger and more complex and more money has got involved.
I was just going to say as well, you're talking about evidence-based things, and I think there's clear evidence in the corporate world that happiness, engagement, kindness, job satisfaction, decreased turnover, these things all go together, profitability and everything. But because it's New South Wales Health, it's, if you're John Hunter or whatever it is, or whatever gets given all the interns, what are you going to do? You're not going to say, I'm not going there because it's if it was a private company and it was a toxic place, and I'm not just saying that about, to John Hunter specifically, but if it was a specific health board, you wouldn't go there if it was a private company, or you would leave and go to somewhere else.
Yes.
We often don't have that choice, and so there isn't that commercial imperative to sort the problem out.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of the problem.
I mean, my contribution is just to talk about the hidden curriculum and I think Ian made the point that everybody here is particularly driven, passionate, talented, capable people, otherwise you wouldn't be here, and yet we don't feel that on a daily basis. And the obligations and the calling to medicine to care for others at the expense of your own self is so high that it's actually taken a very long time for the practitioners to rise up and say, actually, I need to value my own well-being because it's important for my patients. It almost feels like the only way, and the very horrendous and striking number of suicides, I think. But it's almost like it's very difficult for us to stand up and say, I need to be well just because I deserve to be well and I should be well. We've always got to frame it. It's a bit like investing in preschools because it's got an economic benefit, not because it's morally right. But we've got to frame it through our patients, and that's been a safe avenue to talk about well-being.
Yes, no, great. On that question of sort of how do you keep yourself well, this is another question for everyone. Do you have any top tips that you'd care to offer to people embarking on the internship in terms of maintaining wellness themselves?
We were just saying about how we are not practicing what we preach.
Okay, but why? Because how unwell are we? I'm moderately unwell. No, not too bad. Not too bad.
Actually, that's a really important point, though, because it's not you're well or unwell. It is a spectrum of being well going down to burnout. Yeah. And so I think some of that reflection that James is talking about and other people have been talking about is really important, that if you, at certain points, whether it's when you do run changeover or something, you just take a moment to pause and reflect and look back at yourself and go, well, how am I now and how am I compared to where I was at the beginning and where I want to be is a really important thing. Yes. And well-being is different for everybody. So, I could give you tips that might work for me, but they won't work necessarily for you. So but you do have to listen to yourself as well.
Yeah. I think you also need to separate out the different types of well-being. I think we talk about physical well-being and mental well-being and burnout and moral injury in the same way, and I think they're actually quite separate things, and I think when you untangle those a little bit, you've got a better view on it. I'm not great at physical, I'm not a sporty person, I'm pretty good at everything else, but I'm really unsporty. I seriously have not been able to touch my toes since the sport and rec camp started measuring it. And I tend to not value that, but I really, really need my creative stuff going. So I need to be reading books, and I need to be playing music, and I need to be writing, and I need to be drawing. I need to talk a lot. I like talking to people. And I know for me, I survived by having that there, but it was actually ironically James at a director's dinner last year that nagged me into doing exercise. So that worked, so that's
Well
good.
done, James. But I hear what you say, because I agree, often wellness becomes what sports do you play? And as someone who has hated playing sports since I went to primary school, I agree, often that's not the one fits all.
Well, particularly in the world of critical care, everyone seems to be mountain biking and jumping off cliffs and canyoning, and I couldn't be less interested in any of that.
You might actually be more well for not jumping off
Yep.
some of those cliffs.
And so will Clare Richmond.
My opinion on that is that, like, a really key thing as a junior doctor that we often forget, we've created kind of a fallacy that what we're operating in is a cattle run, and that if you stop or slow down or try and turn, you're just going to get trampled. And that's obviously an artifact of the industrial climate that we're seeing at the moment, with the tidal wave of graduates and not enough training positions. But learn yourself that it is a fallacy, that you're not trapped, no matter how much it feels like it. It is a job at the end of the day. If you need some time away from work, you do, and that's fine, and you do need to learn to prioritise yourself. So we need to change, each of us needs to change our mindset to accept that looking after yourself is not a selfish act, like Chris was saying.
It will make you a better doctor.
It will.
And it's a shame that it has to be that, right? Because it should be enough to take care of yourself, to go and see your family doctor or your specialist or whatever. But it also will make you a better doctor, which is, I think, very powerful. But what you said, Caitlin, about it being there's personal well-being, there's well-being now, and then there's well-being over time. So James put it slightly differently, but there have been periods where I've sacrificed my well-being to get a task done, an exam, a project, or whatever, in full recognition that over the span of that year or months or whatever, that was tolerable. It was within tolerances, and then there have been times when I haven't been well enough to do anything and I've had to get external help. But also that the system is very challenging, and I was talking to Emma in the break about the focus on systems well-being. So it is you can't fix system problems by telling people to be more resilient. And I think that's very important as well, and that's where you talk about moral injury rather than just necessarily burnout, and placing the emphasis where that's due.
And I think you're right. I think we will discuss sort of further on in the discussion about the organisational level of responsibility, because I think wellness needs to be addressed from an individual level, but also from an organisational level. Can I ask all of you on the panel, some of which will remember this time and others not, when I was an intern, you'd leave the hospital and you'd switch off your pager, and then no one would contact you after that. Now your mobile phone follows you wherever you go, and be you on holidays or on weekends, be it your work email or people just calling you even when they know that actually you're not at work today. How can you stay well if we're living in a system where it's almost expected that you're never allowed to switch off? Does anyone care to talk to that?
I think mobile phones in general are a huge threat to our well-being broadly. I think they perpetuate things like imposter syndrome and comparing yourself on social media to this fake image that everyone else is portraying, and feel like your fake image is the only one that's actually fake. I think that mobile phones broadly are very damaging, and we need to be very aware about how we interact with technology. But as a junior doctor, I think it wasn't, my experience has been that I am more able to switch off my pager. I know that, as a consultant, it will be very different, because I will have full responsibility, So I think probably for you...
Do emergency medicine. Walk out the door. Done.
Unless you eat me, in which case the only time I'm not on call is if I go on holidays and hand it over. But I accept that that's part of my role.
Because you have a leadership role.
And what do you then do in the context of that, Claire? Is there a way that you can help yourself to then be able to detach from work, or does it always feel then that work is in the background waiting?
I'm in a glass house throwing a stone being on a wellbeing panel, as one of my colleagues pointed out to me last night as I left after a 14.5-hour-long clinical shift. I think the way I have a new strategy, which is I know what I say no to. I've got better at saying no. So the trick to saying no, for those that aren't good at it, is to make up a reason for saying no. So if someone rings you and says, hey, would you like to give a talk on chest pain to the first years? If you say, that means you're doing it. If you say, no, I don't think so, that means I'll ask you again. If you say, no, I can't, I'm taking my daughter to the dentist that day, they'll leave you alone, okay? That's the trick to saying no.
Yes.
The other little thing is, so I know, I'm really lucky, my career's going great guns, I get asked to talk at a lot of stuff. I know the things I talk about and the things I don't. I set a priority list. So this year I'm talking about feminism, mental health and hospital culture, okay? The trouble is I told a few too many people what things they are. Huh. But I say no to the rest. So I've set some priorities.
Yes.
And my team, they know that I've got no button and they will ring me only when they need me. So
Yes.
I have a degree of trust that they won't bother me unless they need to.
Yes. Okay.
Can I pick up? So it's so interesting that you can train a team. It's very hard, I think, as a junior doctor to do that. So I also give excuses, even if they're made up. So this used to be my trick around annual leave, which somehow seemed set in stone but completely flexible as a JMO. So I would always just book tickets to somewhere, and then so they could, if it suited me, and I'd been given good leave. And I think that's a very, just a simple thing. But so two things. Firstly, Lee Sales told me that Oprah Winfrey told her that no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
So, if it's helpful to make up an excuse, that's fine, but you're not obliged to.
But I would concur with Claire that often you feel bad. And so I think if you're assertive enough to be able to say no and leave it at that, then I think that's when it works. And I think if not...
I guess it's just, my daughter to the dentist, would you like to do this? No, actually now she's getting surgery. And then, then before long she's had a whole face reconstruction. And, it can get, it's quite, what was we hearing from Ian, that it takes a lot of effort to lie, right? And so when you're busy, you're like, yes, I'll just do it. I couldn't think of a lie. No, thank you for the invitation, done. But the other thing was, so there's a lot of talk in wellbeing around meditation, sleep, exercise, blah, blah, blah. But you talked about leaning into creative activities. And that was a really surprising thing that I learned, was that actually being more busy in good ways that were restorative was just as legitimate a way to become to wellbeing pathway as switching off, relaxing, doing all that stuff that's actually almost impossible.
Yeah, I'm much better off doing something that's different than I am trying to pretend I can't do nothing. I'm physiologically incapable of doing nothing. This is the stillest I have sat for weeks. And I'm far better off sitting playing the piano, like going, right, today I'm going to work through that bit of Chopin, or I'm going to do a drawing of that, or I'm going to write. I write for reflection. So everyone says, how do you write all these articles? It's just because that's the way I do it. And I'm better off doing that and reaching a flow state, doing that, than I am lying in my bed thinking, can I go to sleep yet? Can I go to sleep yet?
Yeah.
Am I relaxed now? No. Am I relaxed now?
But having productive channels then to actively sort of distract yourself or take yourself away from work. Chris, I might pose this next question to you. I spent, as you would know, a lot of my intern year fearful and afraid, and as a medical registrar as well. How do you think fear impacts on wellbeing, and what strategies would you suggest people use to manage that fear?
Okay, so this is my big thing about fear. Setting aside mental health problems, depression, suicidal ideation, really serious stuff. I'm thinking about distress, when you just feel upset, uncomfortable. For me, I think about it in terms of three causes. So there's fear, there's friction, and there's grief. So friction is obvious. This is like having to see 25 patients in 2 hours with an EMR that only lets you log on once every 15 minutes. That's sort of friction, that's system stuff. And then there's grief, which we talk about rarely. And the reason I have those three is that twice in my career I've perhaps sustained moral injuries the wrong way, but certainly felt the need to call my employee assistance program and go and see a psychologist for several sessions to work through a high level of distress. And it always manifested as fear, doubt in my abilities, decision paralysis, fear I wasn't good enough, fear that I wasn't a good doctor enough, which of course spills into fear I'm not a good father. I'm a pretty good husband, so I rarely worry about that. But sometimes, But fear is hungry. So what I learned, actually I was experiencing grief. So the first instance was a very bad child protection case, and the second instance was a child exactly the same age as our baby daughter, who had a massive right middle cerebral artery stroke and fitted for a very long period of time, no matter what I did. So the fear was hungry, and so what I thought was that I was fearful and doubting, but what actually was I was grieving. And when I figured that out and then gave myself the space to grieve, over a long period of time, using a lot of active, strategies, I got better. And so I guess my take home from that was that when we feel fear, which is normal, just make sure that's what it really is. Because of course, if you doubt your skills as a doctor, or you don't think you're good enough, then the answer is to work harder, work longer, be smarter, get more skills. But if you're grieving, those are actually the opposite things of what you should do to alleviate some of that distress. So that's sort of my take on some of that.
And I was going to discuss it later, but I might slot it in here. Do you think that, and I don't know whether others have an opinion on this as well, do we publicise enough things like the Employee Assistance Program? I mean, I don't feel like I was aware of it until I was a consultant, and I too have used their services and found it very helpful, but I feel like I don't know that it gets enough airtime. Do you think we discuss this enough as a profession, being able to get psychological support?
I think there are a lot of services now available for people working through grief and working through, whatever problems they're having in their life or at work. And I think a lot of them are actually quite poorly publicised. And so many people that I know, almost none of my colleagues would know their employee assistance provider. That's something that I think is very important, and something I've been focusing on in my work with Resident Guide, was just trying to surface those services and let people understand exactly what services are out there, how to contact them, and what they can do to help you.
Yes.
I've forgotten the rest of my point, but...
No, but I think it's well made in terms of trying to get that to the surface so that people know actually that those services are around.
I did remember something actually, sorry.
Cool.
I did use my employee assistance program when I was an intern to go and see a separate psychologist, and it was very helpful. But then the following year, or as a SRMO, I remember being, I think also in my internship, the EAP is often publicised as like a battered flyer that lives at the bottom of a filing cabinet, and it's gingerly pushed across the desk to a junior doctor because they've started crying in a meeting. And that was exactly my experience. I think I was exhausted because I'd been working far too much in ICU. There'd been some very confronting things that linked in with some of my trauma. That kind of despite all my armour, there was a chink and it got through. So I was crying, talking to my supervisor, and he was like, "Ugh."
Here's a flyer.
I hope that goes
Deal with
away.
this.
Yeah. And I think if that's the attitude that we have, is oh God, there's something wrong with you, just make it stop, then that's obviously a completely counterproductive attitude. We need to know that those services are there when we're well, so that we have access to that when we do get unwell, and we don't have to be told to access it by someone, which can be quite confronting, and it seems like a criticism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think also they're being better publicised, but I think there's still a big stigma about going to access them.
Yes.
And getting over that's a big problem.
Yes.
I have another worry as well. So I find that the EAP is sitting on the checklist of things to do if something goes wrong, whether that's an emotional something or whether it's a clinical incident. And I think it almost absolves the person that's the clinical leader in that situation of the emotional leadership role, and that worries me a little bit. I also do have some concerns about privacy in the EAP. I know part of the things probably people don't realise about my role as director of the emergency department is I have 3 mental health professionals on tap constantly, where I refer people if they need them. So I've done my own finding.
Yes.
I have used it. My marriage broke up in September of my intern year, which was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It pales in, no clinical incident gets close to that, and I used the EAP through that, and they were great.
Yes.
But I had some nervousness about it. I think the nervousness was unfounded, but I understand why people have it.
Yes. And I'm
Can
also...
I? Oh, sorry.
No, go.
it's not just the knowing, it's the modelling, right? And so I just want my message to people about EAP is that I think your privacy concerns are unfounded. It's very clear it's a separate organisation. Most places in New South Wales use this place called Converge, which is super weird branding. It doesn't seem like that at all. But you just pick up the phone, you dial 9 or whatever your switch is, you say, I'd like to speak to the Employee Assistance Program. You don't give your name, you don't have to say where you are. And they say, no problem, they put you through, and then you're outside the hospital. Like, it's so easy. And always there's a number on these cards, or it seems quite ephemeral, like you might have to talk to HR or your boss or something to get access. That's not true. You just go through Switch, they put you through, it's done. Within 15 minutes you can either have an appointment or someone will call you back. Like, it's really easy, and I think it is private, and no one has to know, although there should be no shame in using it, which is why I say that I've used it a couple of times, because I don't care. It was important to me and it made a difference.
And I would just say one more plug for EAP. They will also call you and do sessions, 1-hour sessions, psychology sessions with you if your life is a bit too busy to be able to sort of...
You mean phone sessions?
Phone sessions.
Yeah, you don't even have to travel to,
Yeah,
let's say, Leichhardt, hypothetically.
Yeah. My next question is to all of you about burnout. Burnout encompasses 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, depersonalisation, and reduced personal accomplishment. How do you diagnose burnout in yourself or in your colleagues? And is it something that is getting enough airtime?
I can describe what it feels like for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a couple of clues. One is that I start absolutely ruminating about work and not wanting to be there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The second is I stop enjoying it. Like, I resent having to interact with people. I found myself once examining a patient only because the nurse was watching and she might judge me if she didn't see me examining the patient. And I figure when you're vomiting on the way to work as you drive there in the morning, having to pull over and vomit on your way to work, that's probably a sign that you're pretty burnt out. And I've been there twice in my career.
Yeah.
Sorry, honest conversation here.
No, but I think it's really important because I think, Claire, people don't discuss that. Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts in terms of both in yourself, but also I suppose the question of a colleague and being concerned about them burning out?
I think, so burnout, when you're in that state, it's actually harder to recognise that you do need help when you need it most.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it gets to an extreme of, throwing up on your way to work is really terrible. That it has sometimes to get to that stage before you'll realise yourself. So that's why it's important that we, do actually reflect on our own needs, our own feelings, but also look out for our colleagues. If someone is unprofessional at work, who shouts at you and that's abnormal for them, that's probably a sign that that could be a sign of their burnout. But it manifests in a lot of different ways, and I think burnout is, even though the term has been around since the late 70s, everyone has their own way of describing it. So one of my supervisors when I was an intern, I don't know how sweary we should be, I will censor.
Very.
He called
Come on,
okay,
man.
yeah,
It's
okay.
like, am I right? It's a safe space.
Okay, good. So he gave us a talk about wellbeing in our intern year, and he said, we used to call, there's this thing, he didn't know the word burnout, but he said, sometimes you run out of give a fuck. And I was like, that is it. So that's how I think of it now. If when I've run out of give a fuck, then I'm like, oh, right, okay, yep, it's time to dial back and think about what I need to do for myself. But, and I think that's it. But that in itself can be a self-perpetuating thing, because that in itself feels like a moral injury. You think of yourself as a caring person. That's part of, all of us got into medicine with that being one of the boxes that were ticked, yes, I get to help people. And then you get in there and you're just like, I just don't care about any of you. And you just think, who am I? How did I become like this? So yeah, I think just realising at that point that it's not that you're a terrible person, it's that you might be burnt out.
But I think you can recognise that in others. It's really interesting being in a senior role, which feels unbelievable because in my head I'm 27 and I'm a JMO. But I've watched a lot of really, really promising interns and RMOs get onto the training program of their dreams and then be very, very cross and turn into an arsehole, basically, by PGY 4 or 5. And I choose to interpret that through the lens of empathy and think that's actually burnout. It's not who they want to be or deliberate. And that makes it much easier to manage.
Yes.
Can you, because I'm fascinated about how you raise sensitive issues with people who are uniquely vulnerable / impaired to hearing them, right? So let's say a PGY 5 or a senior colleague, which is even more challenging perhaps, but who's showing those signs and they don't want to, what do you do?
I just start with, are you okay, and see how it plays out.
Yep.
Keep it really simple.
Yeah, and I think if the intention, if they know you, and they know that the intention of that question is not a critical one, that it becomes from a genuine concern for their well-being, that makes all the difference.
And then how do, if it's yourself who's starting to burn out, for example, how do you try and bring yourself back from that burnout? What are the steps once it's been diagnosed to go, right, something needs to change?
I'll do a couple of things. It depends, because as you say, it can be different aspects of burnout as well. Is it because I'm just exhausted because I've been doing too much? So do I need to look at my sleep, or do I need to cut back on things? I've started doing another tip for saying no to things, because I'm like you, Clare. I say yes to a lot of things. And if somebody asked me to do something, I think if they were asking me to do it next week, would I say yes? Because it's usually in several months' time. And the answer is usually no, because I'm really busy and I've got things next week. So, well, I'm not going to be any less busy in 3 months' time. So then I just say no and feel good about it. But I try and work out what it is that I need or why I'm getting to that situation. And in fact, just a few months ago, I found that I was exactly that, not give a fuck at work. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to sit patients, and I didn't really care that much. And in fact, I went to did some compassion training. And it was great, and it really refocused me. And so I think that was one aspect that I needed at the time. How
did you do that compassion training? Where was that?
Sydney Uni had a psychology meeting and all day thing, and we were talking about stuff and looking at some programs. And so it was actually very fortuitous. But I'd been looking into it before, and then this popped up, and I thought, ooh, and because I'd realised that that's not me. I turn into a person I don't like, and the values that I value. I don't espouse anymore, or I behave in ways that I get cranky, or I don't listen. My emotional intelligence drops down, and it's never that good anyway because I'm a bloke, But so I
not
just
true. You have to drop that stereotype.
But I think the key to it is you've got to reflect honestly. You've got to be brutally self-honest, but you've got to give yourself self-compassion as well, and that's another really key part that I've worked on quite a lot in the last years is self-compassion. You go, look, I try, and I screw it up all the time, but I try, and it's okay.
Yes.
That's okay, because I'm going to try the next day. A bit like that quote that I think, James, you put up, the Dalai Lama quote. You try each day to get a little bit better.
This idea of scheduling is so important too, right? So
yes.
That's why I mentioned annual leave. So I remember constantly as a JMO being asked to change, or my colleagues were asked to change their leave. Or the in fashion Durga thing, of course, is to take annual leave to go and do a course or something, because that's considered, So that might be okay. This is about temporary sacrificing of well-being to achieve a very defined goal that has a good outcome. But protecting that leave, so for me, speaking with the privilege of having a consultant position and so recognizing this might not fit exactly where you are, but I know, for example, I always think in October, November, that in February, March, I will be so refreshed by the Christmas go slow period that I can do whatever I like. And it took 3 years. So twice I went to EAP was in March because I was hopelessly overcommitted, right? I just had this fantasy about how I would feel in March, which is wrong. So now on my phone, every year until the phone breaks or I die or Google shuts me out of the calendar, it just says February, March, it says do not book anything, say no. So this is the first year it's happened, but I had to do that many months ago, or see an opportunity for compassion training or something that might rejuvenate yourself, because our rosters are so set. Just book it in a day, a half a day or something, and then protect it. And so that as it rolls around, you might find you're up, in which case it's a fun thing to do, or you might find you're down, in which case it could save you. But somehow scheduling those things in, I think, gives them a potency. Free afternoons, they don't exist. If I have nothing booked, I have no reason to say no. If I have something booked, then even if it just says say no, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm booked that day. It says it.
Well, actually, I'd like just to take that on for a point. There's some stuff that's come out from share trading, looking at sort of guys who are day traders, very high performance, high stress stuff. And what they found with these guys is big burnout rates. But if they schedule regularly something that makes them happy, something that gives them fulfillment, something that stimulates them either mentally or physically, and something that gives them connection on a daily basis, they can perform at a very high level for a very long time without burning out, because it's exactly what you say, because as soon as you get busy and tired, the first thing that goes is all the good stuff you're supposed to do for yourself. And so like I try and play tennis on a Thursday evening. Now that fits a bit of exercise, it fits playing with some friends, it makes me happy. So that's 3 things in one go. It's awesome. It doesn't have to be something every single day, but if you schedule it, you schedule brunch with a friend, you schedule this, because otherwise it will go, and you can get home and you're knackered, and you just put Netflix on, you can have a beer, and then that's the end of it.
Don't diss that.
It's really important. That's my happy place. Yeah.
Can I just take that then tangent potentially off road, just because you spoke about share traders? I know we're getting close towards the end of the session, though our stopwatch has stopped. But Jules, there was, I think, quite a bit of interest in talking about financial well-being, and I think it struck me that in the system that we work in, we work, we get promotions, we overextend ourselves with mortgages, then we feel locked into working more and more. And if you're
the hedonistic treadmill.
Out, if your mental health is starting to suffer, you can feel really quite trapped. Can you give the JMO some suggestions about financial well-being and things that maybe we should be cultivating to free us up down the track?
Yeah, sure. I think it's something that's not discussed at all generally in medicine, and I never really got any training or anything about finances and stuff with medicine. You go from being 5 years as a student and eating toast and cornflakes to suddenly getting paid and paying off your debts. And I've always lived from I get overdrawn, right, now I need to go do locums, I want to go traveling, save up, and that was my financial management for years. So the first thing I say, get the Barefoot Investor and read that. It's really good, and it will just sort out most of your stuff. Okay, it's really good. And yeah, Why Reinvent the Wheel is a great book, and it will teach you a lot of good basics about stuff. The other thing is, it's very bright here, but hands up who has income protection? Can't see. Okay, so over your lifetime, you're going to earn about $15 million probably. Okay, unless you're an orthopedic surgeon or neurosurgeon or something. If you own, I put it to this way, if you owned something that was worth $15 million, you would insure it. So can I just please, if you do nothing else after today, go and get income protection, all right? Because you're young and fit at the moment, so it'll be cheap. Don't try and get it later on when you're older and you've got health problems and stuff like that. And life has a habit of throwing curveballs at people's. An RMO of mine in the past got cancer and then got metastatic cancer. Or rather, it recurred. They can't get insurance then. Yeah, can't work because they're having chemo. They got no income. Somebody else I know who got married, bought a house, and everything, and then their husband was killed in a car crash. And they weren't in any state to work, and now had to have a house which they had to pay, they were going to have 2 incomes for. And there's just multiple cases of these happening. It's not common, but it happens. So please get income protection. Okay, you're really valuable. Okay, you deserve to protect yourselves. So that's a couple of things. I did write some resources out for other stuff about investing and share trading and stuff, but work out your goals. Work out your objectives in life. How much money do you think you need? Because if you start to get to a point where you want to take some time off, I cut my hours down recently. My kids are getting to the age where I want to try and spend a little bit more time with them before they become grumpy teenagers. And if I wasn't financially well, then I couldn't do that. And then I would feel trapped, and I'm much more likely to feel burnt out, I think, and resentful and things. So work out what your financial freedom number is. How much money do you need? And for me, financial was not about being rich at all. It's about working out what your goals are and what you need to achieve that, so you don't have to worry about the money.
Great, thank you. We're getting close towards the end, but I just want to touch on, Clare, you've spoken about civility, and obviously on the wards there's sort of referenced civilities, Saves Lives movement in the UK. What would you say is the importance of civility in hospital teams, but also how can we promote it in our own teams?
I think the thing that's really important here is civility is pretty easy, it's cheap, it's something you can do. My experience of trying to be polite and kind and nice and compassionate in medicine has been that's been what I get back. It absolutely pays itself back in spades if you choose to be a nice person. It's not always easy. There are moments when I want to bite someone's head off or snap at them or use very rude words, and it's much nicer if you take a deep breath and just think about it with empathy. And I think this is something we can all do. You're not going to be perfect. There are going to be days when you just can't muster good behaviour. But if we all make a decision that that's something we can do, it makes a massive difference. My personal reflection, I do really difficult clinical things all the time. I work in a suburban emergency department. I could do with double the amount of medical staff I have. I don't have them. But when I go home and the things that keep me awake at night, it's often just a bad interaction with a colleague. It's not a clinical decision.
Yeah, totally.
And that eats away at my mental health, and it eats away at relationships, and it eats away at patient care. And it's a really big organisational thing we can do to try and create a culture of safety and trust and a place where people feel safe and they can interact with civility and respect.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to add one thing to that, is that I say to my kids and juniors and everyone else, is you're not responsible for other people's behaviours, but you are responsible for yours and how you respond to others. And if, like you say, if we could all be a little bit kinder, if we all had that compassion or whatever, and that's, you don't need medical expertise. This is why I say stop learning the medicine, focus on some of that stuff. The whole place will be so much better.
Yeah.
And you can do that now as a junior and role model it as well to the medical students coming through.
And remember what it's like to be the junior in an interaction, and keep that little kernel inside yourself so that when you're the senior and the head of the department, you remember what it was like to be the junior. I can't believe how quickly people forget. We've all been the junior.
And you don't have to put up with people being rude to you if they are senior. I mean, you should treat people the way you want to be treated, but also if someone's really egregiously unpleasant to you, then I think would be expected, and I'd hope you would find a senior person in your life who might not be a line manager, but someone else to help you manage that, because internalising and crushing down the resentment and anger, it's got to come out some way, right? So if someone's consistently rude to you, or even just in a very serious way, you probably can't manage that situation just with civility. You probably do need to seek other help, and so I think it's about more to colleagues and for consults and handovers and stuff. That's really important to be civil. But if someone senior to you is behaving in a not a good way, then that's not on you, and you should look for help.
I think we've got time for one last question, and I'm going to quote James Edwards' blog in On the Wards here, when he said that we need to, when it comes to burnout, move from an individual approach to an approach that is an organisational one when it comes to burnout. Do we need a key performance indicator when it comes to doctors' wellbeing or doctors' suicide? I suppose back to the initial question of evidence and institutional change. What can we do so that some of the wellness space gets shifted to an organisational one rather than just an individual one?
I think organisations do have responsibility, but just put that out there, you know. So I think they can't wash their hands of this.
And how do we make those organisations take responsibility for that?
Over to you, Caitlin.
I'm a big fan of the notion of key performance indicators and of using accreditation and bonuses or whatever. If you take off your cynic's hat for a moment, not just because they'll only do something for money, but it kind of giving the management of the hospital legitimacy, like a legitimate reason to allocate resources to this problem is key. So at my time at Stanford WellMD Centre during my Churchill Fellowship, their sort of framework for talking about professional fulfilment is in three major domains. So they talk about personal resilience, which is largely the individual's responsibility. That's making sure that your own hierarchy of needs doesn't look like a Jenga game. And then the rest is a culture of wellness and efficiency of practice. So, and those two are very clearly indicated in this framework to be the responsibility of the institution. So something that they are advocating for is having a chief wellness officer, so having someone within the executive suite who is accountable for the wellbeing of all the staff in the hospital. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, in Australia, our work health and safety laws include your psychological health. Your employer has a duty of care under federal law to protect your psychological health. So, you know, there is some kind of framework there. I think we just do need to build on it and kind of empower institutions to allocate funds to this.
And the evidence is there now to show that it will improve patient care,
Yes.
which is important.
I also think there's cognitive dissonance by hospital execs around the wellness problem versus resourcing, staffing, budgets, KPIs, etc. The KPIs in hospitals at the moment are very much around money and patient flow,
Yes.
and they're not around staff wellbeing. And I think, unfortunately, with the way management structures work, if you need it taken seriously, even if it's only temporarily for a period of change, you do need some KPIs sitting there.
Yes.
So if you're a JMO, you know, taking KPIs one step further, if you're going to pay or invest in a wellbeing program that's reasonable, respectful, likely to have impact, evidence-based, it could be important to show your support in some way, right? Whether it is either showing up, if that's achievable, or simply writing an email of appreciation or something then that supports that program. So it doesn't have to be another onerous obligation. It could just simply be an expression of gratitude. That's something that the person organising that can say, listen, this is important and meaningful to our JMO group, we should continue this, as opposed to we tried it, it didn't really catch on, and now we're just going to shelve it because other things take over. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, I think we are out of time. I'm just going to look now to my Twitter moderator to see have there been any questions that have come in, and if not, we'll open some questions as well.
Can I make a comment? It's Emma. I had my performance meeting with the ministry on Tuesday. Susan Pearce sitting around the table, and it got my turn to speak as the executive. And in my portfolio is JMO Wellbeing. And I was asked about JMO rostering. I was expected to know exactly how many JMOs on how many shifts for the last month had worked more than 14 hours and how many had had less than a 10-hour break in between shifts. So there is a small but significant shift at a senior level to start to focus on the system issues around wellbeing.
So that would throw the pressure on reporting hours worked. Is that fair? So we all know there are hidden disincentives to reporting actual hours worked, but that would be a simple thing that it's possible to do. Emma doesn't know how long you worked if your timesheet shows 8 hours.
Absolutely.
But I would point out as well that your badge, when you walk into the hospital, swipes you in, and actually electronically your hospital knows precisely when you're there.
Oh, yeah.
So if
Have you ever been charged
for real.
So a colleague of mine has been charged extra for their part-time car parking because they exceeded the allowance, like hundreds of dollars of extra car parking, but the hospital, you know, it's like, anyway, somebody knows. It's about accessing that data.
But it means that in this day and age, you can access that data. So actually, if New South Wales Health actually does want to take this seriously, there is data to be had so that it doesn't just come down to how someone filled in a rostered timesheet. Yeah. Any other questions, either through Twitter or from the floor?
I guess something that I've experienced is the power imbalance with medical workforce when they're expecting your CVs to not just show great references of being a great clinician, but also having an academia portfolio, even as a JMO, getting on top of research. And so how do you kind of get enough points on your CV with those activities, but then also maintain your wellbeing?
Does anyone care to comment?
Well, I could reassure you that if you ever applied for a consultant post in my department, I would hire you on the basis of your niceness and not what's sitting on your CV. But I know that doesn't work at your age. The other thing you need to know is the medical student tsunami is actually a myth. I used to be a workforce researcher. I had a year off from clinical medicine many years ago. When I did the survey in February 2004, there were 1,350 junior doctor positions in New South Wales hospitals, and at that stage we were graduating 450 students. We currently graduate about 950. I can promise you there's more jobs still than there are students in the system. So to some extent you can feel secure in that you actually can. You guys have been sold that there's a tsunami and you have to compete all the time. To some extent you can still be your own person, find your own path, find a mentor who will actually give you good advice. There's a degree to which that competitive thing is a myth, okay?
Yeah, I see a lot of this in my role as DPAT. Slow down. Take a bit longer to get there. You don't have to do it all in the first year. I was PGY 10 before I became a registrar. Now, there was a slight focus to that, and I did do some interesting jobs in interesting places, all of which served me well, going abroad and things. But you don't have to get it all done in the first year. You're going to be a consultant for 30 to 40 years. There's no rush. If you want the jobs and it's a passion, and if you are well and performing well, and you're a good, kind, nice person, you'll make so many contacts around the place that people will want to hire you. I say that as an ED physician. I mean, we are generally fairly short, and it may be slightly different for dermatology, and you may need to get advice from people specifically in that. But in general, and I've spoken to ICU and surgical people because I want to make sure I'm sort of giving vaguely right advice to people when they come and see me, and they've all agreed with me. They said, yeah, everyone's got a master's, so it's not a discriminator anymore. So yeah, you can do the master's, but you don't have to do it in the first year or the second year.
I actually find that things like community service, creative projects, travel, they stick out more in your CV than whether you've got a master's, whether you did a research project with the prof.
Yeah, do something that makes your CV interesting. I've forgotten who was it. Who was in? It was you, wasn't it? Who went into Thailand and yeah. I was a surf camp doctor in Tonga for 2 months, and that was the only thing I got asked at my MedReg interview in London. And the thing. Why did you come back? They said. So yeah, slow down.
So is it fair to say also that things that what you used to phrase, the colour, what came into the world, things that you enjoy, you can always stretch for. The cattle run, that's where we think we have to say yes to opportunities that suck, right? That you just hate and you don't want to do. So maybe there are other opportunities out there that will be more rejuvenating. But also, of course, they're either cheap. Things can be cheap, good, or fast. You can choose 2 of those. Right, so if it's going to be cheap and good, it's going to be really slow. Or if it's going to be fast and good, it's going to be really expensive. So, if you're going to do something fast and well, it's going to cost you a lot in terms of your own well-being. And so that's not the only decision to be made. It's not the only way to do it.
And from my perspective, and I've only done employment of sort of majority SRMOs, but I would say that actually it's amazing how lackluster some of the CVs are. My CV was pretty lackluster, but someone once said to me, just whatever you do, don't hire a dickhead. And I would say that actually if you're a nice person and you're known as being a nice person who looks after your colleagues, actually you don't actually need to have the flashiest CV, just don't be a dickhead.
And we're really short at gossip for RMOs at the moment. Just want to put that out there.
And it wants me too. Fantastic job opportunity just down the road. There you go.
As a junior doctor, though, I think I totally understand the fear. I don't think that is entirely a myth because, while there is this, the tsunami, there are still jobs, but it's the training jobs where the bottleneck sits. And in specialties, like orthopedics or whatever, you can be doing unaccredited jobs for like 7 years before you get on a training program, and it ends up being kind of a war of attrition, like who actually gives up first. So I think there is a lot of pressure, certainly, and there's kind of this CV arms race happening of, everyone's now getting a master, not everyone, but like it feels like so many people are getting a master's concurrently with med school, or while they're working full time in.
Awful.
And it's.
Yeah, you're more well qualified than the consultants who are interviewing.
Yeah, so I don't have a master's.
I don't.
But give up early and do something different. That's got to be the message from today.
That sounds like a Homer Simpson thing. Never follow your dreams.
Does anyone else have one more positive note that we could end on rather than give up early?
And that's the thing is that, I remember that feeling, getting so frustrated, particularly in my SRMO year, because I was gunning for anaesthetics and, I had to be so impressive and I was an outsider, so there's an extra barrier. And I just got so, angry at times, just being like, can we all stop being so fucking impressive? Can everyone just calm down and, give themselves permission to just stare at the wall? Or Netflix and beer. So legitimate. But I think I eventually realised, I think possibly because I've been able to step out of the cattle run, that pushing yourself to burnout in order to achieve this goal that you have in your head, that you have to hit every possible mark in the CV, if you burn yourself out, you'll probably become a dickhead and then no one will want to work with you. So the number one priority is actually looking after yourself. And, burnout kills your passion for what you're doing. Like, can you remember the moment of your, medical school career or your career as a junior doctor so far when you just thought, I am so lucky to be in this position, to be helping this person, to be seeing this pathology? Like, reconnecting with that passion is only possible if you're looking after yourself. And it's passion that breeds success. It's not exhaustion. So, I know that CVs, it feels like you have to do the teaching and the research and the masters and be a abseiling champion or something in order to get a job. But the thing is, if you do something, any one of those things with passion and something that refills you, or replenishes you, that will lead to more opportunities. And I mean, that's been my journey of discovery in pursuing clinician wellbeing. Anaesthetics just felt like a constant uphill battle. I slaved away trying to become impressive enough to get an anaesthetic training position. But then by the time I went to my interviews, I was, quite badly burnt out, and they could see it in my face. I was just like, oh God. They're asking things and they were like, you hate anaesthetics, don't you? It was true, I did by that point. So if you can do something that reconnects you with your passion and your own values, that will shine through in everything that you do.
And I think we should end on that note. Thank you all. Can you all join me in thanking